please. Mrs. Flynn.
How are you?
We're just talking about the wrong way.
Oh, horrible. I know. Yeah. So crazy.
We were saved by,
I know.
I called you.
Do you see Chris Rosario's? He's like in that traffic. It's like right there.
All right, everybody. Good morning, and on behalf
got
of
saved by
women voters,
long-winded.
I'd like to welcome you all to
Senate
the
Memorial.
spring 2024 legislative wrap-up. Just one word, the sound now, we don't have microphones, you'll notice, was my question. Sound's in the ceiling, so any side conversations or whispering or whatever will be overheard and broadcast. Just so you know. Again, welcome. And I want to thank our legislators who finished their session about 20 minutes ago. And rather than collapse on the couch like normal people, who really gave their time to us to come here this morning. I'd be napping. The League of Women Voters is an organization that promotes participation and education in our democratic process. And forums like this really fit the bill. Today, I'm going to open the discussion by asking a question and inviting our legislators to spend about 2 minutes each in response. And after that, I'd like to turn it over to our audience and for you folks to take the lead. If you have a question, there's a podium there. You can go to that and ask your questions. What we do ask is that it actually be a question and not a statement, and that you address it to the entire panel so that everybody has a chance to answer. We have today with us Senator Tony Hwang, Representatives Kristen McCarthy-Vahey, Jennifer Leeper, and Sarah Kett. And again, thank you so much for being here today. It's really our privilege. All right, so I'm going to start with a question. I'm going to ask for a thumbs up and a thumbs down from each of you. For the thumbs up, identify or highlight an accomplishment or something that happened that you really felt stood out for you this session. And for a thumbs down, the opposite, something that you were either disappointed in, or whether it be legislation or something else, but just your kind of recap, a thumbs up and a thumbs down for this session. And Tony, we'll start with you.
Thank you. And before we start, we always do the thank you to the League of Women Voters, but I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge my fellow legislators who are also mothers, and wish you all a happy Mother's Day. And I'm lucky enough to have my incredible wife in the audience who rarely come to these events, but I wanted to do it because I wanted to acknowledge her for being an incredible mother. And for us and what we do day in and day out, we couldn't do it without our spouse's support and their family support. So a happy Mother's Day to my incredible wife and to all of my colleagues here up here. I think the thumbs up has to be on a broader macro perspective. It has to be how we manage to stay within the fiscal guardrails. In our budgeting, we didn't open up the budget, even though there was some contentions about it. But nevertheless, we used federal ARPA money that would have expired December 31st of this year. We used it to be able to fund education, to be able to support our nonprofits. It wasn't enough when you're thinking about 300+ million of ARPA money, when you have nearly $1.2 billion in asks and appropriations. We did the best we could, but we were able to allocate the money and stay within the constraints of the budget for a fiscal guardrail. And in bonding, we did the same thing. We didn't overspend on the credit card, but we took care of higher education. We took care of social equity issues. We helped in a number of different things. So on a macro perspective, I think we did a really good job in how we managed the pocketbooks and respect the taxpayers. Another two big accomplishments is relative to the town of Fairfield, and this was truly a bipartisan collaborative effort between Fairfield and Bridgeport legislators in regards to the UI monopole situation. We were able to pass out a comprehensive bill related to electrical transmission, which relates then into the siting council, which then relates to what's really happening in the town of Fairfield and Bridgeport. And I think the third ultimate aspect was we had a lot of good things done. To thumbs down, I think our environmental bills, from climate resiliency, coastal resiliency to the broad scope of addressing climate. And it was broad. They call it the green monster, but it was a bill that had been kind of adapted and unfortunately never got called. And I think the other important factor of the thumbs up is, as the ranking member in transportation, we did some comprehensive extension to what we did on Vision Zero, which is a comprehensive safety relative to roadways, pedestrian, biking. And what just happened on Thursday morning at 1:45, as we were all driving back from Hartford, of a wrong way accident and fatality. And it's a preventable tragedy. And what we need to do is work further to raise awareness on impairment in distracted driving, but also I know in our bill passage, we passed to include over 230 entrance ramps to be able to put in highly sophisticated warning signals, not only larger signs, but electronic sensors and warning systems. And we're exploring rumble strips, so if you're going the wrong way. But ultimately, it really is a preventable tragedy, and it's a horrible tragedy. So I've taken up the time on that. There's so many more, but thank you. It's more than 2 minutes. I apologize.
Kristen.
Thank you. I'm gonna.
You're staying within 2
I'm gonna
minutes?
set the timer. Okay.
Sorry.
Thumbs up. As public health co-chair, that really does dominate, when you serve as chair, that dominates the session. And I was thrilled and relieved at 10 of 12, we were able to pass a bill that made telehealth and authorized it permanently for the state, which no one read about in the paper, was the #1 priority for me. We have all come to rely on telehealth for access to healthcare. Huge relief. We did a number of other things in public health this year. We also addressed home health care workers and their safety in Senate Bill 1, which actually included about 20 other bills in it. Personally, as the daughter of an Agent Orange Vietnam vet, we created a Parkinson's registry in that bill, which is, again, one of the small things, but we also had an initiative about the Healthy Brain Initiative for Alzheimer's patients. And Joyce is talking to me. I hear you, Joyce. I don't know. Somebody's phone is on over there. In terms of transportation, one of the specific things that I know was in our large bill was creating a local traffic authority and an ability for us as a community to designate local traffic authorities that are not just the police department, but would instead allow a number of community voices, including planners, police, et cetera. That's really important. And election day reform, or excuse me, election reforms. We, in the GAE committee, did a number of things. I have about 20 seconds left. So we can talk more. I agree with Tony in terms of the climate bills, extremely disappointing. A huge disappointment. Also disappointing that we weren't able to do more with housing. And the zoning bills are always very controversial. I chaired the Planning and Development Committee for 4 years. We have a crisis on our hands. We have more and more people being unable to afford living here, being homeless. In recent weeks, we saw in the New York Times a report that let us know that the Bridgeport, Norwalk, Stamford metropolitan statistical area is in the top 10 in the nation for lack of affordability for both renting and buying. So I'm 30 seconds over. I'll stop. Thank you.
Doesn't have to be precisely this.
I went over.
I know. You know what? There's lots more time to talk. I
Yes.
figured that's in your range.
Thanks, Bryce. Thanks everyone who took time out of their Sunday to be here, and those who literally ran over from the Mombies 5K. I had also been wanting to do that, but I'm Jennifer Leeper. I represent the 132nd, and we had some major victories this year. It took us to, I think, like the 10 o'clock hour in the Senate to really be able to celebrate, but the City Council victory is enormous. It was so much work, such a collaboration, of course, between the 4 of us, but also with the community. And I think everyone in this room probably knows how instrumental the community has been. And I just can't thank them enough because they have sacrificed tremendously to advocate for this work, to be engaged, to become so educated on transmission policy, which everybody's eyes would glaze over if we go into it at all. It's incredibly complex and boring, but they've done it and they've educated all of us along the way. So we've passed some really meaningful reforms. I've seen some comparison to what was vetoed last year versus what we've done this year. Just to put it in context, the Siting Council was not even on our radar last year. This application really came before us, and it was filed in March, but the community really became aware of it in August. And what we've done this year is pretty massive reform. And to do that in a short session is incredible. We will probably talk more about it. I suspect there'll be some questions on it, so I won't go into those details right now. But another huge thing that has been sort of an albatross around this community's neck for 17 years is the racial imbalance law. And we were able this year to, what sometimes is the best approach, be a submarine, don't draw a lot of attention to it, and just get it over the finish line. But we were able to put the implementation of the racial imbalance law on pause because the way the racial imbalance law is structured is that it only looks within municipalities, and therefore it really only captures our actually integrated schools, which is why in a state where racial isolation is sort of the norm, the 5 schools that have been captured under this law are truly integrated schools. So I'm really excited that we've been able to do that, let this community have a sigh of relief, and we'll come back to it next year to either fund the really comprehensive study or decide that being, I think, the only state in the nation left with a law like this, maybe we just put it on the shelf into perpetuity. So that's another huge victory. We streamlined teacher certification to make it easier and less cumbersome to become a teacher in our state. We maintained our historic education cost sharing funding. We also provided 100% property tax relief to 100% disabled veterans. That is a huge issue. I think probably all of us have a veteran in our lives that is really inspiring to us. And we also had some incredible advocates within the community who pushed for that. I could go on and on, but I'll switch to a few heartbreaks. I'd spent the past 2 years working on a bill to license clinical lactation consultants, which is a service that pretty much every new mom needs. I know breastfeeding sounds like it comes easily, but for many it doesn't, and a little help can set you up to be successful for a year. And it saves on formula, and also it just has so many health benefits, both for the mothers and of course for the babies. And unfortunately, we weren't able to get that across the finish line this year, which was devastating. I share deeply the regrets about failing again on our environmental policy, specifically 5004, which was the green monster, but also our electric vehicle needs, because our transmission sector is by far and away the largest polluting sector. And until we really wrap our arms around that, it'll be hard to have a huge impact on much else. But similarly, even rodenticides, we couldn't get across the finish line this year. So there's more, but I think I'm probably way over my 2 minutes, and I'll hand it over to Sarah. Thanks.
Thank you. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Sarah Kitt. I represent 134th. This was my first short session, and it was every bit as crazy as people warned me. Benefits and negatives of going last is a lot of what I wanted to talk about. My colleagues have already covered, but some huge wins. I think one that we haven't talked about is our aging bill that went through that has really enacted a lot of protections for our seniors. It requires the Department of Social Services Commission to maintain a registry of home care agencies to help better connect consumers and families and seniors with appropriate home care agencies and make that a little bit easier for families. And also helps with quality of life issues in nursing homes, making sure that the oversight of long-term care is similar in different licensed facilities. It prohibits nursing homes from putting newly admitted residents into a room with more than 2 people. With overcrowding, it creates requires that residential care communities provide more information about costs and about reimbursements and how they can adjust fees if need be. And it's just a lot of protections for our seniors. Personally, for me, a big win was the passage of our hate speech bill, which will create a task force that will look at how hate speech is impacting our children across the state. We do a pretty good job here in Fairfield, but not everybody feels safe. And we hear almost every day of incidents of hate speech or bullying in surrounding communities. And this task force will look at race, religion, sexual orientation, gender identity, and how these children feel supported or not supported in their communities, and what we as the adults can do to make our schools and our communities more welcoming and safer for these children. I mean, I've talked to children across the state who don't feel safe going into the bathrooms in their schools or walking through certain neighborhoods because of hate speech. So this is something I worked on. Was very, very happy to see it pass unanimously out of the House and the Senate as well. So I was very, very proud of that. Switching to my thumbs down, again, I echo the sorrow over our environment bill. We've ignored our environment too long, and we're reaching that tipping point. So I really hope we can get these provisions across the finish line next session. Housing, we need to do much, much more. We need to find a way to balance our need for more housing, especially here in Fairfield, with our desire to preserve the natural beauty. But we can't have it both ways and still expect to grow as a town and also protecting our environment. And then my last thumbs down, it was a result of us not opening up the budget, which is that we weren't able to raise Medicaid reimbursement rates for providers. This is critical if we're going to be able to not only maintain our providers here in the state, but attract new providers to provide the care that our seniors need, our children need, our individuals with special needs rely on. And we haven't raised our Medicaid rates here in Connecticut since the 90s, I believe. So we are well overdue. So I'm hoping next session, when we do have a new budget, that we can really ease that crunch for providers by raising those Medicaid rates.
Thank you. Does anybody have a question they'd like to ask? I've got some, but you usually get tired of listening to me. We've talked about the budget a little bit, so let's keep going on that. The budget process is not easy when money is tight, but we've witnessed it can be just as difficult, or if not more, when there's enough or extra money as well. What are your thoughts on this session's budget, including but not limited to the guardrails, and whether or not they are good, bad, or should be flexible?
So do I get to start?
We'll do the rotation.
Sure. Well, you'll see again and again my public health lens coming out in my gut reaction. And this is by far not the biggest issue that we face, but just like with the opioid settlement, we have a tobacco trust fund from the tobacco settlement. We've gotten millions and millions of dollars over the years. I don't have the numbers at the tip of my fingers or head. We have continued to take that money and use it in the general fund for lots of important expenses, but not for tobacco prevention. And again, this year, the money was swept and taken away. So even in this year, there was still the push-pull of, $12 million, which is not a ton in the scheme of a, $20 million, I actually, approximately, budget. So yes, we still have challenges about how we prioritize our spending and why. And I think specifically, Bryce, to answer your question about the fiscal guardrails, we know that we are going to, whoever the we is in the next General Assembly, bump up against those spending caps. And we are, I think, going to have some difficult and different kinds of conversations, because thank you, Representative Kitt, for talking about those Medicaid rates, which is something that I know Rep. Leeper has also worked quite a bit on, both of you as Human Services Committee members. And why does that matter? I mean, maybe no one in this room has needs to partake in those benefits, but many of our neighbors here in Fairfield, certainly in Bridgeport, 25% of the 133rd district is Bridgeport. In Trumbull, and every community take advantage. And our hospitals, their health, our specialties, our children's mental health, our adult mental health, all of these things rely on those rates. So the guardrails and the volatility caps have actually really helped us in many ways. When I started in the General Assembly, all I talked about to so many people was pensions. Pensions, pensions, pensions. We've done a tremendous job paying down those liabilities. We still have a very long way to go. And we also don't tend to talk a ton about OPEB. Who knows what OPEB is out there? Yeah, okay, not the ringers in the back, but that's those other retirement employee benefits, the healthcare costs. That's a good thing. But in the meantime, we have more and more people out on the streets. So you know what? We were too far out of balance the other way. So sometimes the pendulum swings, and I think next session we're gonna have to engage. And I think we will need to have some flexibility in the end. How much? That'll be a negotiation, but I think we will have to.
I suspect you're gonna hear a similar refrain. I don't want to speak for my other colleagues, but it's always about balance, and we've made huge strides. I think we all feel really proud about paying down our pension liabilities. And again, we have a long way to go, so we don't want to totally abandon the path we're on because it's been successful. I think the recognition in where the spending cap is and the volatility cap, they're somewhat random, like they were chosen in that 2017 budget year, and you know, it wasn't like an exact science of where they picked those cap levels. So perhaps allowing a little more of the volatility cap to be spent or raising the spending cap a little are discussions that are important. To put a finer point on what Kristen was saying, 30% of our state is on Medicaid. Medicaid, if you look at the income eligibility for Medicaid, it is extremely low. You have to be living in extremely low income situations to be qualifying for Medicaid. So the fact that 30% of our state qualifies, it's truthfully a living condition that most of us here in Fairfield can't even imagine. And because of the way that our communities are carved up into 169 tiny little fiefdoms, you don't really have to if you don't want to see the poverty that so many in our state are living in. And lifting up everyone is beneficial to all of us. I talk about that often in an education lens, caring a lot about our children in Bridgeport graduating from high school, being prepared to be successful and live meaningful and vibrant and productive lives benefits us all when you're prepared to go out into the world and be productive. Similarly, being healthy is just as important to all of us. So while we will be looking at increasing Medicaid spending, which has been something, a top priority for me, we've done a 2-year Medicaid rate study. Next year, we'll get the second half of the study, but the first year's study results indicated in comparison both to private insurance and Medicaid across the country, we are an outlier. We are amongst the worst reimbursement rates in the nation. That truthfully is shameful for a state that's so wealthy, which means our providers, our physicians, don't want to take Medicaid patients because they can't make ends meet in seeing Medicaid patients. So while we have a good Medicaid system, if we don't have providers serving that population, we have a huge access issue where you have insurance in name only. So I could go on for longer than I should on this, but next year we will be looking really seriously about what we'll have to do to phase in those rate increases, because this truthfully is going to be a multi-billion-dollar solution. That's the scale of this. So we're not going to snap our fingers and fix Medicaid. Well, it will likely be as a 5-10 year sort of phase in. That's going to be really costly, and doing that in the balance of all the other needs, very serious needs in the state, is a dance, and also being mindful of keeping those fiscal guardrails in a responsible place so we can continue to pay down those pensions. So I know that's not a very precise answer, but it's sort of the juggle we do with all the needs we face, both in our communities and across the state.
I can't disagree with anything you've all said. We will have to look at the flexibility of these guardrails. Some of these caps were set based on some of all-time lows for our income here as a state. So we need to adjust. So when we do have more money in the coffers, we can spend a little bit more without being irresponsible and spending everything. There is that balance, there's that dance, but it is, to me, almost immoral to have all this excess money at our fingertips while kids are suffering, while people with disabilities are suffering. And Jen made a comment that, Medicaid issues might not impact people here in Fairfield, but I'll say I was one of those families where it does. During the pandemic, my husband was out of work for 14 months. We had no health insurance except through the state. My kids were on Husky. It's a system that's there to catch us when we're at our worst and help lift us all up. And if it weren't for Medicaid, my kids wouldn't have had health care for over a year and a half. I wouldn't be able to get health care. So it's a system we need to make sure is there when we need it. And we have to readjust our idea of poverty. I mean, our Medicaid levels are set so low, and a lot of what we do is based on the federal poverty limit, which nobody in Connecticut can survive at the federal poverty limit. A more accurate look at what poverty really means here in Connecticut is looking at United Way's ALICE families. And these are asset limited, income constrained, employed families, are working poor. And almost 30% of my district qualifies as ALICE families. And for Fairfield, for Connecticut, that income's roughly $106,000 for a family of 4. That's what it takes just to get by, to pay for your rent, your food, your medical costs. I mean, it's a bare bones budget. And so we need these social services programs that the state pays for to be strong and to be there when people need it. And which is why I believe we do need to have some flexibility in those guardrails to make sure we can fund our nonprofit providers, we can keep Medicaid afloat, that we can provide housing support for families as they are working and trying to transition off of these social services programs.
You know what? I agree that our Medicaid rates are far too low, and it has needed to change for many years. It's unique because our Medicaid allocation comes from the federal government, and then it depends on the state to administer it. So it is really a state mandate, but we get the money, and it's a unique system. Be clear, it's far too low, and then reimbursements needs to change. That being said, I think budgeting is about priorities. It really is about priorities, and as we talked about Medicare reimbursement being too low, our nonprofits reimbursements are way too low. We hadn't had a change in Medicare and our nonprofit reimbursements in over 15 years until about a couple of years ago with a new budget. And we have to look at structure of government as well, because in our nonprofit systems that do such great work, like the Kennedy Collective, Ability Beyond, few people know that we have a dual delivery system in the state of Connecticut, that the Department of DDS does some of the same work as the Kennedy Collective. But the reimbursement and the salaries and the benefits are day and night. And so one of the things that I worked on since I first got elected 15 years ago and requested and got a study done that was done 7-8 years ago was to look at the cost disparity and the reimbursement disparity between the dual delivery system. And what it came out was our nonprofits deliver the same kind of caliber of services at the same kind of quality assurance at literally 50 cents on the tax dollar. So if we're talking about being able to provide for those on services on Medicaid and our nonprofit critical services, should we not look at government itself to be more efficient, to utilize our nonprofits and better utilize our tax dollars? That's been the biggest frustration for me, is that we need to restructure the priorities of our government to ensure that those that are critically in need in our safety net gets taken care of, not government itself. One of the biggest frustrations I had in not breaking through the fiscal guardrail is that we allocated $190+ million for a pay raise to state employees with step ups and bonuses, when that money could have been very well used for Medicaid reimbursement rate increases for nonprofits. Again, budgeting is about priorities, and there are certain groups that take advantage of it, and there are certain groups that suffer of it. So transparency, accountability, and how we govern is critically important to make sure that we address these rates.
I also was able to take advantage of Medicaid during the pandemic, and it is something that's close to home because it made a world of difference, and even peace of mind alone. So just want to make that comment too. Do we have any questions from you folks? You're awfully quiet.
Could I also add that
Yes,
Medicare rates are also too low, puts tremendous pressure in regards to a cottage industry that sells supplemental programs. Our Medicare programs are far too low. And one of the struggles that we have as the ranking on insurance is we're trying to address healthcare costs, which are unsustainable and unaffordable at the rate of increases, but you can't tie it. One of the governor's solution is to tie it to Medicaid and Medicare rates. Well, those rates are too low to tie it to how we reimburse doctors. We have to have a real market measure on how we reimburse and provide the critical services that's needed.
Switching gears a little bit, as concerns increase regarding the ill effects of social media on our young population, do you support restricting usage by age or other criteria?
Well, I'm first.
You are.
Yes.
Want to take a moment? No.
I feel like this is an issue where I joke, I'm like a 1980s mom. I think that the social media is the worst thing that ever happened to any of us. It's horrible. And to put that pressure on our kids is awful. I often use the anecdote. So when I went to college, 2 of my roommates had gone to boarding school, and they would talk about what it was like to never leave that like social environment where you had like the peer pressure and the expectations and all these things that you feel so deeply as a teenager. Versus like I went home, and home was a safe space, and I could, you know, whatever, you're in pajamas and you're at home and you're whatever, you're in a safe little bubble, and they never had that. And I feel like social media has taken that safe space away from our kids. That is so important to be able to develop and make mistakes and do all of that in like a safety net of your home. I mean, under, right, like the best conditions, which beyond that component, I think it's just so distracting. I think even as adults, we talk about that. We feel that distraction of what it's done to our brains. And our brains aren't still developing in the way of a young person's brain. So I'm an old school mom, my poor kids, I'm the meanest mom ever, and we don't even have iPads. They don't play video games. I'm no judgment. I think we're all navigating this also, especially I will speak for our generations. We didn't grow up with this. So we're navigating it the first time as parents, which is hard. And it's hard also feeling like your kid's the only one who's left out, which is I think another thing. I'll give a huge plug to the Wait Till 8 program that has come up in Fairfield. That is an effort to help parents find a community of people who feel similarly. And it's, again, not judgmental for people who are making a different choice for their kids, because we're all doing our best. But it's nice when your kid comes home and says, I'm the only one who doesn't have a cell phone, because I know actually I'm a part of this group and I know these other kids don't have a cell phone. And I can see my intern laughing because I'm old school, and I'm like, even with them, commenting on the phones, because I think it's robbing our young people of some innocence and space and grace that's so important while you're developing. And I could go on, but I'll stop. If even when I was on the board of that, my first year, I was like, why don't we just ban cell phones? And I very quickly was told, like, that will never fly. But I would have been interested in having that conversation, and I still feel interested in
Let
it.
me just go a step further. What sort of restrictions would you recommend, and what ages about? And you don't have to, I'm not asking you to write the law, but
Yeah, I was
just
gonna say, I don't have a fully fleshed out policy, but you did see that there's a middle school in Connecticut that was successful. And what happened is that they got a lot of pushback at first. And then as they went through it, I think people could see the benefits. I worked at an elementary school in New York City that was co-located with 3 high schools. Education's very different in the city. And what they had was like an old ice cream truck that now was a cell phone storage truck. And every kid, before you'd go into high school, every single day had to pay their like $2 to the person who would hold their cell phones outside the building. And at the end of the day, they all went back and got their phones back. I always thought that was sort of ingenious and creative, because we can't limit what happens with kids in technology outside of school, of course, but we can put some parameters for those hours while they are there. And I don't think that would be in vain. I think it would be impactful.
I agree. I have 2 teenagers, they're 18 and 19, so they're a little bit older, but social media has really been the bane of our existence. They got their cell phones when they went to middle school. I did not allow them to have social media accounts until they were 16 and 17. It's hard because kids know the workarounds. I think any parent knows, you can say whatever you want about what can and can't get on their phone, but you know, they're very, well, one of mine is very smart, the other one not so much. Technology wise, they are both brilliant kids, but technology wise. And again, it's not a one size fits all. My youngest one really doesn't have an issue with social media. They use it to post their art, and that's about it. The other one, I'll say, you know, it borderlines on addiction. And I think we, as the adults, need to look a lot more at some of these apps and some of the things they are doing that foster addiction. TikTok, for one, is, you know, you can buy coins to give to creators as to show them you appreciate them, but it's a way to curry favor. And for a lot of kids, it's a serotonin thing, and they become addicted. And these in-app purchases to buy social standing, it does become an addiction, and it is considered an addiction. So we need to regulate it as such. You know, I'm talking to the Attorney General about what we can do and looking into this so we can protect our kids. And so they're not being manipulated. They're not being taken advantage of for their money. And their brains aren't being conditioned towards addiction. So I agree wholeheartedly that we really need to take a serious look at social media for our kids. And if anybody you guys, we need to look to you guys to help us figure out how to get around the kids who are getting around us.
I like Jen's answer. Yes. Look, social media is an offset of technology innovation. It's inevitable. It's fast changing. There's been great contributions. You know, one of the big assets is, I'll talk about my daughter, 29 years old. She's been able to stay in touch with her friends from kindergarten and maintain that lasting lifetime relationship because they stay connected. And there's great opportunities for that kind of connectivity. But the danger in regards to social media is it really does look at data privacy. We look at bullying that occurs online because of the kind of ease in which attacks and misinformation can occur. But we also look at predators that go online to search out our young children, and even grown adults fall prey to the predator aspect. I think the biggest part in me in social media, and Kristen will follow because she's been very active in it, is it puts an incredible burden on youth mental health crisis that we have. It creates a unsustainable and unrealistic imagery of what is the status quo. And it puts just tremendous pressure on our young people to live up to standards that are not real. And I think that is one of the most dangerous aspects that we need to understand is these kind of portrayals, TikTok and what's hip, what's cool, and how we live by that kind of social affirmation. It happens to all of us, not just young people. It's something that we have to be very conscious of. And one of the disappointments that I had this year is we did look at artificial intelligence and its ability to replace and change imagery and to be able to change audio, which may impact obviously political campaigns, but social standing in life. That, I mean, what hits the biggest news is the image adaptions of Taylor Swift or somebody prominent. But how many of it does it occur? What people don't realize, what AI has done, you look at a Google phone ad and they say, geez, you can displace heads and change the imagery. That's all AI imagery of changing photos. And what can people do from an attack, a misinformation campaign, not only from individuals and exchanges of people, but also from governments who uses it to foment dissent. So ultimately, I think the biggest aspect is for us to manage technology without constraining innovation, without constraining First Amendment. It's a very difficult thing. But going back, and I'll reassure Representative Leeper, there is a movement to be able to have a magnetic pouch. So when kids go into school, that phone is into a pouch and you don't get it till you come out. And that is something that is gaining momentum. And perhaps when we all initiate it next year, we can gather forces and say, we're not denying our kids the right to their phones. We're saying when you're at school, you focus on school.
I work at an elementary school and they have the watches now as well. So it's not just the phones, it's the connectivity.
Dick Tracy.
I'm not going to be as woven together as I'd like to be because I want to build on everything that my colleagues have said. This morning, I got an email basically saying someone noticed I haven't been posting on my Facebook page as much. Is something wrong? Which is, yes, something is wrong. I've had a family tragedy this year, but it's not just kids, right? It's all of us. I mean, we feel it very much as political leaders, right? My screen time, I'd be embarrassed to share that. Our kids see that. So modeling, just like we know with anything in parenting. But when I think about all that, and I think about the addiction and the efforts, wait till 8th, which is 8th grade, to get devices, and the pressure on schools and parents, I actually get a little angry because it's the big tech corporations that are making billions of dollars that are creating the structures that are so overwhelming and difficult to face. You know, it's just like with the UI situation, Rep. Leeper, who, you know, first kind of outed all this and worked together with the neighbors and then brought everyone along to do this. It's like a David and Goliath situation. And, you know, our Board of Ed chair, Jen Jacobson, is here and she can talk about just years ago, one data privacy bill that we did. And oh my gosh, the lobbyists that come in the building and descend on this conversation, because as Tony said, yeah, our country is founded on freedom of speech. We want that. That's absolutely critical. We have to maintain that. Freedom of speech doesn't mean that people get to do and say whatever they want, whatever they want to. It means that we have to figure out the right balance. We also want to make sure that we're allowing for innovation. And, you know, healthcare, again, you're hearing from me, the healthcare piece, AI. We had a forum, Senator Amor and I, my co-chair, with Senator Blumenthal on healthcare, AI and healthcare. And it's absolutely maybe surprising to some people that there are AI tools that don't discriminate in the same way that doctors do, for example. I mean, so there are things we need and want to be able to help in areas such as healthcare and so many more. But to Senator Wong's point, the impact on youth mental health is tremendous. It is, there is absolutely no question. And we can't just expect parents and schools to deal with this. We have to look at the structures. And I appreciate very much, you know, Rep. Kitt as Children's Committee Vice Chair talking with the AG's office. Our AG has been a leader in so many of these things. And we're gonna have to figure this out. It's an interesting issue too, because it's not, this one is one that doesn't tend to be partisan. It's a checkerboard kind of issue. But what I mean by that is when votes like that go up on the board, it tends to be not all red on one side and green on the other. you see the checkerboard, because we're all grappling with how do we deal with this and how do we face this? So, you know, the simple answer is, yeah, my kids didn't have cell phones until 8th grade, but we still ended up having some pretty massive issues, right? And so I think that's a great start. My children would probably revolt if they heard what I said. So I do think it's absolutely true. Young people themselves, and especially young people who are digital natives, those people who are in their 20s, you know, especially, who I think can really, really speak to this and help us to craft the solutions. They understand it differently than we ever will be able to, you know? So we need you. You're here, and we're really grateful you're here, by the way.
Well, I'm glad that you mentioned the addictive part of it, because it's not necessarily just content. Excuse me, my granddaughter's 24. She never is without her phone. And I don't mean it's in her pocket. I mean, she's on it. She relies on it. It's always on and around. So I think some of this is already done. So it behooves us to look at starting this a little bit younger, so to get this in a better frame.
Following that vein, I worked with, in a bipartisan basis, worked with Senator Maroney from Milford. We actually co-introduced a bill as an amendment to really look at algorithms, because I think that's ultimately the addictive aspects of it. Because when algorithms, through compilation of hundreds of thousands of data points, get exactly what you like to see, you will notice on TikTok, on Instagram, you get mesmerized, because when one video's done, the next one that comes, because the algorithm has been able to identify what you want. You see the algorithms when you shop. You look at a pair of shoes. The next 5 days, the algorithm shows you the retail aspect of the shoes. We marvel at it. And there's a joke. There's a joke among our colleagues, and even among my family. The phone is listening to you.
Oh,
100%.
Right?
It
And so you think about that. So it comes down to the algorithms create that understanding. So what we try to do was really try to control the data privacy. And we gave people options, particularly for youth, is that parents that may be subject to seeing their kids bullied or want them removed from their data points and algorithm data, you can request the carriers, because one of the other biggest problems is you can't contact any of them. There is no live contact, right? But we created a statute last year that says if you want content removed, they have to remove it within 30 days based upon a formal request. Nobody knows about that still, right? It's getting some control back to consumers and advocates and that really want to be able to say enough is enough. Stop invading our privacy and using the algorithm to target us. Sorry.
Thank you.
Clearly, we could talk about this one for a while, right?
It's too real,
It's a big
right?
one.
We're living through it.
Yeah.
And I want to compliment, Representative Leeper's answers. Yes, something needs to be done, but the devil's in the details, how we allocate it.
But we couldn't pass the AI bill. So that's a great example. Sorry,
No,
but here, you're hearing us all saying the same things, but we weren't able to pass the bill. So, whenever people say, oh, it's simple. And
No,
and
it's
no
not
one
simple.
thinks
Nothing
this
is
is-
simple.
no
It's not
one thinks
simple.
this even, this was the first, after 4 years, getting the lollipop bill passed. I mean.
Yeah, you know what?
congratulations to the Timothy, Dwight, and Mrs. Rob's students, but the AI bill, we couldn't get it done.
Oh, yeah, I'd rather go back to the lollipop. bill.
please.
So I have a question about the Green Monster bill, which we've.
Your name and your name and residence, that's what you do when you have to give testimony.
My name is Other Bowen and I'm resident here in Fairfield of the 102nd District. And my question is about the Green Monster bill, which we've heard in passing and making references you've made to it. So I'm more interested to know why the bill couldn't get through the Senate and what kind of future you see for this bill in the next legislative session. Thank you so much.
Okay, I guess I'm first this time. And Adira, you're actually the 134th.
Oh, am I? I'm so sorry.
It's okay. I knock on your door all the time. Adira actually lives in my neighborhood. Very proud of Adira. Well, I think I'm gonna leave the why I didn't get through the Senate to our dear senator here. But I really do think it's something we have to pursue next session. We are at that tipping point of if we don't act, we're going to cross that line where we're not going to be able to save our environment. And Connecticut's sliding backwards in some ways when it comes to our greenhouse gas emissions. Number one contributor is transportation. So we really have to look at facilitating the expansion of electric and other renewable fuel cell cars. We need to build that infrastructure here in Connecticut to make sure that we can have those cars and we can adapt to new technology as it becomes more affordable and more accessible. Tony, I'm gonna leave you.
No. House Bill 5004, the Green Monster. And I also mentioned in my opening the disappointment, Senate Bill 11, which was the governor's bill on coastal resiliency. So a little bit of background, when a House bill starts at the House, and if it's approved from the House, it needs to go to the Senate. And a Senate bill needs to be approved by the Senate and goes to the House, right? Because we're bicameral body. And our committees are bicameral because you have both House and Senate members, so joint favorable approval. Both of those bills got joint favorable with a lot of question marks and a lot of no votes, even though it passed. So there was a lot of devil in the details. Now with 5004, it is a green monster because there were, at last check, there were like 45 different sections with real comprehensive changes that I supported, okay? And it used a carrot incentive in saying, adopt these, move this forward, et cetera. But it came at a fiscal note. That's what a lot of people don't get. And it went to appropriations, and appropriations took out all of those fiscal notes. So the bill was really stripped down. So it went back to the House to tell you how much I knew about the details about this, but the House added the money back in. So it got passed out of the House. It was again dramatically amended and changed and softened up. And it had every opportunity to get to the Senate. So it sat on the Senate calendar for over a week and everybody wanted to get it done. But the problem was you had a lot of dissension, and in a bipartisan objection of both senators in the Democrat cycle and the Republican cycle didn't really want it to be called. Now, you had overwhelming support from the House, but the Senate has 36 members, and we debate and process bills to the dismay of House members, right? And that bill did not get a consensus. And now, just a little more background, this is really inside the Beltway. Senate Bill 11, which is the governor's bill, could not get called because there was no promise it would get called in the House. So between two big environmental bills, both of which I supported, they were playing a tug of war between each other. And they both became casualties in a setting where time ran out on a short session and they couldn't get either house to agree. So from the standpoint, yes, did the Senate stall out and not push for 5004? Yes. But it was almost a Democrat and Republican senator objection to it, because we pushed out bills that the Senate majority uniformly wanted. They have the plurality, okay? But at the same time, Senate Bill 11, the governor's bill, never got called in the Senate because they knew it couldn't get passed in the House. And so that's the tug of war and challenge. But to me, regardless of whatever the inside baseball is, both bills would have been incredibly helpful. You know, when you talk about the concern about climate change impacting what both of those bills wanted to do, they were important and they were necessary. And I was happy as a Republican, even in leadership, to say, I support this bill. And I've been clear with the League of Conservation Voters and the leaders in that I am supportive of both of those bills. But nevertheless, the way the Senate operate, you can have one or two individuals that choose to filibuster that could kill any bill. And that is unfortunately what happened to both of those Senate and House bills related to climate change initiatives, which I support.
And I just want to be clear, I wasn't blaming Senator Wong.
No.
But just that he's got the insides.
But make no mistake about it, it is an emotional kind of a time when there's minutes to spare with a constitutional amendment. And Jen, you were way too kind because we voted on 507 at 11:45. Okay?
We're all sweating.
Because one of my colleagues decided to filibuster a bill
Yes.
with voting rights. It was way too vivid, but no, it was 11:40.
I will just kind of add a process piece, and I was trying to look up how many bills we started with in public health. I know, I keep talking about public health. But I always describe the process as a filter. I was looking this morning, we started with dozens of bills in public health. And it winnows its way down, and in the end, we passed, I believe, out of both chambers, I believe public health passed 14 bills, which is a lot,
It's a lot.
actually. And we had tucked many of our other bills into some of those bills with bipartisan negotiation and consent. We're really lucky in public health. Well, we're not lucky. We work hard together on both sides of the aisle. But my point is, what happens when we get to that last week, and I appreciate Senator Wong sharing that, is it's the pie with the time clock, and even a pebble can stop the wheels of the most powerful machinery at the end of session. And that's the frustrating thing. The other thing is, committee leadership matters. And the Environment Committee, it has kind of had a bumpy ride a little bit in terms of how the leadership has navigated the process as well. So that hasn't helped us either. And then finally, when it comes to the environment, we can talk about big tech, but holy cow, the big energy, fossil fuel, I mean, that's also no joke. Kind of like big tobacco. I keep going back to these same things. But as public health chair, we have the worst air here in the Northeast. Our asthma rates, particularly for our neighbors in Bridgeport, even more so, are just stunning. So what I think Rep. Leeper started with, or no, did you say earlier, you talked about the greenhouse, one of you, I'm sorry, Rep. Kim or Rep. Leeper, talked about transportation being responsible for the worst of the contributions to our greenhouse gas emissions. Look, I'm driving a diesel car right now. And I'm driving a diesel car because it's what we can afford, and it's many years old, and it gets 44 miles a gallon. And it costs me less to drive to Hartford. I want to drive an electric vehicle. I need a different kind of infrastructure and a different cost structure to be able to do that. And that's again where we can all make our individual choices, as can you, about, and we should, and I continue to try and do that in as many ways as I can. Like I'm having confession here. But the structures have to be set up for us to succeed. And it can't just be, you should do this and you should do that and I should do this. We have to set up these structures. So are we gonna, if I get to go back to Hartford, am I gonna continue to fight like the Dickens to make sure that we do these things? Yes. And am I going to support in particular my colleagues who are the champions for that? Because we all can't champion everything. That's what I've learned too. Being able to be a part of a team is so powerful in that we can kind of divide and conquer. So I think that's the other thing is I'm going to be supporting colleagues and actually, helping them get elected. People who this is something that they will champion and that they will go to bat and do all the work Oftentimes, big bills like these do take a few years to get through. Although I will say with environmental bills, we keep hitting I don't know, it feels like more than a brick wall. It's like reinforced concrete.
No, I feel very encouraged that we made a lot of movements and let's not make any mistake about it. Climate change is real and it's impacting us and we need to get ahead of it. And I do believe
No, we have.
there's momentum.
I mean, there is momentum and maybe I sound defeated. It doesn't mean I am. I think this was a disappointment, but I have a weeble wobble on my desk now. I know that not everyone here knows what a weeble wobble is, but
I do.
I see some smiles. Thank you very much. Generational thing, but that is exactly why I keep it on my desk, because in the legislature, you have to remember that, okay, it goes down, but then it can come back up. So we'll just come back and keep fighting.
Tables wobble, but they don't fall down.
Yes.
Thank you.
I feel bad to go last on this. As the one member of the delegation who's on the Environment Committee, I pushed my way on this session because I felt so strongly about helping get these bills across the finish line. So you can imagine it's been quite a defeat. But also Kristen often talks about, and especially in the last week, but I think it applies generally, that it's often policy, politics, personality, and they can't be overstated, the personality component. And the Environment Committee was a real education for me this year. I remember talking to the House Chair after, and I was like, what is going on this committee? Because people have very strong opinions, and it's one of the few committees I've been on. It's the only committee I've been on where there are members on the committee there to explicitly stop any climate legislation and who explicitly deny that climate change is real. And so that's the dynamic. And I want to just say, like, Senator Wong is clearly not that. And I don't want to speak for him, but I can imagine it's frustrating often having to convince people climate change is real. And so I just want to give Tony a shout out because he has been standing with us to fight for meaningful climate reform. But in the committee, that's not the dynamic. And, you know, even on the House floor, one of our House colleagues has said he doesn't worship at the altar of climate change. And we could go on and on. So that's part of the challenge. And part of that brick wall is that it's not real, it's not man-made, it's part of the natural order of things, and we shouldn't have to augment our lives in any way or infringe on business development in any way due to climate, because that's a separate entity that we have no control over. So I do think like that's the big picture of what we're up against. And I do think it's somewhat intimidating, truthfully, to make what I think are needed, but really dramatic reforms into the way we live. And there isn't a way. I come from a very conservative family, and anyone who knows me has heard me say that many times. You know, I have these conversations in my family and often hear, well, it can't happen until it makes economic sense. And I don't want to totally reject that, but I do think that that lens fails to recognize that we actually are all paying a cost right now. And instead of having the big powerful companies pay the cost, we all pay the cost. We pay the cost in high gas prices, we pay the cost in health impacts. I often talk about how in my second pregnancy, I had cholestasis. I hope most people don't know what that is, but women in Connecticut have the highest rate in the nation of cholestasis, and no one knows why. And I couldn't help but feel like at the time, like our environment is a part of that. We're breathing in all these chemicals. We couldn't get rodenticides or neonics passed. Essentially, the message we're saying is if you're wealthy enough, you can poison the rest of us. And that is how I feel. But I will tell you, that's not a really popular thing to say. Here it is, like I say it, but I stand by it. We need to really think about the externalities of our status quo and the fact we pay, but we don't realize we always pay. And I think the original question was why 5,004 died in the Senate. And I will recognize in those final days, there's a lot of trades that are made. And I think probably there was a SB 11, 5004 trade that nobody was willing to run first. And also the reality with big bills like that is that you have to, in your planning of your calendar, plan a whole day. Because that we have a tradition in Connecticut of unlimited debate. And you know those big things will be debated the whole day. And if you don't set those days aside for that debate, they won't happen. I don't know, unless you make some really dramatic trades. And that's part of the sausage making and those, especially in those final 2 weeks. So guess we can just promise to continue to fight the good fight, but.
Well, I think all for us united to continue that pursuit and much needed.
Yeah.
Thanks for the question.
Do you have any other
30
questions
minutes
from the audience?
Hi, Melissa Longo. I live at 3791 Congress Street. I'm currently an RTM member, but I'm here today as a member of the community. And I just had a couple of questions, actually. Curious what you're going to do about cannabis distribution and how are you going to aid in consumer protection, as well as addiction services? Because as you all were talking about earlier, distracted driving and the wrong way collisions that have happened in the last couple of years were, as you all said earlier, very preventable. But most of these deaths and fatalities with these wrong way turns were caused by people who were under the influence. So I'm just curious where you stand on that issue and what you plan to do about that if you get elected again for the next session.
I can start.
Yep.
I had opposed when we passed out cannabis legalization. Was it 3 years ago or 2 years ago? And the frustration I had was, as the ranking member in public health, it never went to public health for vetting. And no, and it didn't go to transportation, which I was a member at. And it didn't go to public safety, which wanted to look at the implications of it. It only went to finance because we looked at cannabis legalization from a finance standpoint without fully understanding the implications. So I was vehemently a no, but it was overridden by a majority. And it was done during the COVID time period in which we were all virtual. So I don't think it had the full vetting process that was necessary, but nevertheless, it is law. And what it did put in was allowing municipalities to opt in or opt out in regards to having shops. Fairfield thankfully has maintained and not allowing any cannabis shops to locate. But the frustration is we have not looked at the public health crisis that may ensue. I think one of the biggest challenges, as Representative McCarthy-Vahey has been a true advocate in regards to smoking, cigarettes, and vaping. And for me, I have applauded that because that is a public health scourge, particularly in attracting our young people into a life of that usage. My frustration is we've now legalized cannabis, not because we looked at the public health side of it, not because we looked at the education side of it, or public safety, or transportation implications of impairment. We looked at it because of money. And that to me was a tremendous injustice. Now the cat's out of the bag. So what we did in transportation is, as we looked at impairment in driving, as rises in the wrong way driving and also the dangerous driving patterns that have occurred, we're looking at how we can now create tests. We don't have tests for it because alcohol, you can do blood alcohol. And I supported lowering it to 0.05, which caused some dismay among many people. But I think we need to cut down on impairment while driving on the roads. And as I said earlier, the tragedy that occurred just Thursday morning, as we were all coming back after a long night of being on the road, I can't tell you how grateful I am for my wife to call me at 2 o'clock and say, drive safely and get home safe. That is ultimately for me the danger, not only from a public health, but also what we have seen, the dangers on the road. I don't think we should have legalized marijuana. I've always maintained that, and I've never voted for it to be legalized.
So I did vote yes and not for the money. Not at all. I co-founded Fairfield Cares Community Coalition to deal with youth substance misuse, and mental health wellness. Cannabis is not legal for young people. One of the realities that we were facing as a state was we're going this way regionally. Alcohol remains by far for our young people and adults, the most impactful and most deadly substance for all users. So I think it's really important that we continue to underscore that message, not because there aren't issues with cannabis, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, but because we cannot lose that focus and understand that that is a massive issue. It's an issue here in our community that we don't talk about a lot. We thankfully have a federal grant now that our schools are supporting. But in terms of the cannabis question, I mean, I'm just going to put out there the question that we've been hearing a lot about is the amendment that happened on the House floor. And there were a number of amendments on a bill that, you know what, I supported parts of those. I did not vote in favor of any of the amendments on the bill because, as happens in process, at the end of session, that bill was an agency bill that had a lot of important pieces on it, and it was at risk of dying. And I didn't want to see that bill die. But we do have an issue when it comes in particular in terms of transportation, what we do related to cannabis. And we absolutely need to do more to help educate people. In the course of that vote, I was able to have a number of conversations with colleagues on either side of the aisle, frankly, who are on both sides of the aisle. There are people who don't understand that if you're smoking cannabis and you drive, that's impaired driving. There are people who simply do not believe that that is a fact. So one of the things that we have done and that we need to continue to do is to fund drug recognition experts. As Tony has said, there's no test for cannabis. And, there are blood tests, but you can't do that out on the side of the road. You can't a breathalyzer. Also, it can stay in your system for a long period of time. And so we're not sure yet how to do that, but we are sure how to train drug recognition experts so that we know that. We need to invest more in funding to help get the word out. We know from our work with substance misuse prevention, social norms campaigns actually make a difference. Sounds silly. It's mostly marketing, advertising, but kind of impacting the norm, just like seatbelts weren't the thing, helmets when skiing weren't the thing, helmets when bike riding. These are all social norms. That's what will work in terms of what we need to do, especially with young people. I have heard so many young people say, I'm a better driver after I've had cannabis. And that is just factually an inaccurate statement. So
And it's dangerous.
it's very dangerous. So the other thing that has happened, I don't know all the details, but I learned at the end of session, the federal government has changed their recognition of cannabis. And you know what that means? That means that that's what I hope it means and what it should mean and likely will mean. We will be able to study and understand in a whole different way. We have information and in much different ways about opioids, about alcohol, about tobacco. And we need to understand more because while I said what I did about alcohol, we know especially that in the developing brain, cannabis is dangerous. But we also know that medical marijuana has been proven to be an effective use of that substance to help people deal with their medical issues. So I think we need to understand more. We need to have some, I hope, for me, conversations from an evidence-based, research-based standpoint. And I'm hoping the federal government can give us more tools to be able to do that. But when it comes to the driving piece, you're absolutely right. The large majority of those wrong way drivers are impaired, alcohol impaired, and other substances as well. And we have to do more. Tony talked about the lowering the blood alcohol content. It's true. In Fairfield, and Fairfield Cares supported this. by not having the dispensaries not be here. But the reality is, you know, I can walk to the Bridgeport border. This is something that's part of our lives. So we are going to need to empower people and to educate people so that they understand, especially our young people, the safety issues and concerns.
It's hard to go after the public health chair and co-founder of Fairfield Cares. I think I'll just add, we tried to pass a bill that did include a lot of consumer protections. And so it's hard in the same way with DUIs, the behavior that's leading to these wrong way, which I think we all agree we want to continue to do more on, is already illegal. It's illegal behavior to smoke cannabis, to operate your vehicle under the influence. That's already illegal behavior. I remember we had a DUI here in town, and I spoke with our police at length about it, and they said, Jen, you'll be shocked how many DUIs are every night here in town. And I think, I don't know of any family who has not have been impacted by alcoholism, and that continues to be a huge focus, I think, of our conversation. And similarly, cannabis. I voted for the cannabis law also. Not just for the money, although I do think getting this out of the black market and better regulating the safety of the products that we know people are consuming is important from a public health standpoint. But also because I think as a nation, we've put all of our eggs in the opioid basket, and that obviously has not worked out well for us. And so I'm really hopeful for the new research that will come out of the federal government changing its regulation of cannabis so that we can better understand it, better know how to enact meaningful consumer protections going forward. And where are places that this substance is helpful? We know our veterans community is one we hear from a lot, that this has provided them a tremendous amount of relief. And where are places that it's not? And certainly our young people, it's already illegal, will continue to be illegal. And I think the better funding for marketing campaigns to help young people understand how unsafe these substances are for them is critically important. And I think that's like a universal perspective. I haven't heard anybody not believe that is essential.
So I was not in office when we decriminalized marijuana. And I will say I support the decriminalization of it. I think there's a big difference between decriminalizing decriminalizing cannabis and the overwhelming proliferation of retailers and the use of it in public spaces. I think we didn't do enough to regulate that. And I think that's something we need to go back and look at. We need to put much more resources towards prevention and educating our youth, because a lot of our young people are using it as a way to deal with their social anxiety and depression, and instead of getting true mental health services that they need. And it's dangerous because there is a lot of data showing that the use of cannabis in youth leads to long-term mental health issues down the road. So I'm all for doing much more public education, more outreach to our youth, tighter regulations about the sales. But not only that, but we need to crack down on our smoke shops that are popping up here in town. We have a lot of smoke shops, and they are a source for synthetic cannabis products and often sell to youth because the fines are minimal. It's easier they make more money selling to youth illegally than they do paying the fine. So that is something I want to look at and work on cracking down on these vape shops. Getting back to the amendment that was offered that I know has been a subject, about why we didn't vote for it, because as Kristen said, it would have killed an important bill that our agencies needed to operate. But I do support many of the things that were in that amendment. I'm willing next session to go back and talk about it and really vet them as well, because some of the things the amendment called for would have resulted in some significant civil rights violations, because it's legal to smoke a cigarette in a car with children. Do I think it's good? Absolutely not, but it's legal. So how is a police officer, if they see a car with smoke, are they gonna pull over, you know, how do they know it's cannabis and not tobacco? It could have resulted in people just eating gummy bears, being pulled over, eating a gummy bear. I'm guilty of it. I've had bad gummy bears sometimes on those long drives, perfectly legal, because they weren't edibles. So it deserves those aspects of the amendment deserve a hard look, a vetting to make sure that we can get these provisions passed in a way that is equitable, they don't violate civil rights, and that they will be effective. And that law enforcement can have the tools they need to do this in a way that's smart. And I'm all for that because we can't keep having these impaired drivers on the road. It's dangerous for all of us. So absolutely, I support more research and more programs for prevention and mitigation. Having more drug treatment programs for our young people, more mental health providers for our young people, so they aren't resorting to cannabis instead of therapy or mental health treatment. You know, I don't think it's really that partisan an issue. It's just a question of, do we do this in a way that's smart and thoughtful and will have long-term beneficial effects, or do we act in a way that's reactionary and will ultimately end up with any laws we pass being thrown out on constitutional grounds?
May I add one other piece?
Certainly.
And I just want to underscore, I was trying to pull up the Fairfield Care survey data, but on my phone, the internet is not cooperating with me. I want to be really clear about Fairfield data in particular, and alcohol use blows away cannabis use like by many, many multiples. The issue that we're having with cannabis is that the trend line is going in the wrong direction. We've actually done a lot because we use these social norms campaigns, and I wish Jen Jacobson was here, she could speak to it. She actually does prevention training all over the state as a professional and has been involved in Fairfield Cares for many years. But we use to great effect some social norms campaign, and we have the data that shows that our alcohol use, it's still way too high. It's kind of like the pension thing. We've made great progress, but it's still not okay. But the issue that's happening with cannabis is the perception of harm, parent perception of harm has gone down, and peer perception of harm has gone down. So people think that it's safe and okay for young people. It's not, period. So in addition to those perception of harm numbers going down, the usage rate is creeping up. But again, I want everyone to walk away knowing it is nowhere near where alcohol is. The trend line is a problem, so we have to be able to do more. Fairfield Cares, there are conversations happening right now with Selectman's office. We have a new mental health youth collaborative. We're trying to actually bring together police, Parks and Rec, town, Fairfield Cares, and put these resources together so that we can actually do a better job. Bringing in potentially more grants will be up for renewal. So that Drug-Free Communities grant, which is a federal CDC grant, it's a 5-year grant. We need to renew. We hope we can get another 5 years and then take that and build on it so that we can do more, because, you know, it's all these issues, whether it's opioids, cannabis, alcohol, and other forms of addiction, social
I'm gonna
media,
throw
and
tobacco in there too.
tobacco, we constantly, nicotine delivery devices, all of it. Anyway, sorry, okay.
Well, thank you all. I would invite you each now to spend a minute on a closing remark or two. And Sarah, why don't we start at this end and move down?
I just want to thank all of you, especially any of you who voted for me last time, because this was just an amazing honor to serve these last 2 years. I've learned a lot, and I'm so excited to get to work on a number of things that didn't get across the finish line, or things that I've been passionate about that are now coming to fruition for me to be able to work on. And I want to just keep listening and hearing what our community needs. To that end, I want to give a little plug on, is it Friday the 20, I got to check my dates here because the 24th, this entire delegation is putting on a roundtable at the Bigelow Center on seniors and mental health, and I'm at 10 a.m. And I want to encourage you all to go there. I touched on briefly on some of the aging bills that passed this session, and we're actually going to have the chair of the aging committee there to give a lot more detail. She's fantastic, as well as representatives, the commissioner, the ombudsman for the Office of Long-Term Care, and representatives from the Alzheimer's Association, AARP, to give out a lot of information about what we've been doing as a state to support our seniors. So I encourage you all to come, and it's hosted by all four of us.
I just want to say thanks. It's such a privilege to do this work. It's so energizing, so inspiring. We have the most incredible community that is so engaged and informed and bringing us ideas constantly. So much of our success comes from the ideas within our own community. And it's just such a privilege to be the liaison between this community and the General Assembly. I feel really energized after this session. We had some really historic wins, things that certainly the Siting Council was a very David and Goliath, and we sweated it to the last minutes, but we got it done. And a win is a win. And so I feel incredible about that. Similarly with racial imbalance, those are two really high profile things for the community, but we've done a really impactful job for improving the profession of teaching, which is also, we talk a lot of things that are crises, but our teaching profession is at a crisis place, and we are losing teachers, and that will have absolutely devastating impacts for, you know, potentially a generation. And so we've done something meaningful this year, and including continuing our enhanced education funding. And, you know, with our $400 of ARPA funds, $400 million of ARPA funds, felt like $400. You know, we've invested in higher ed so that our flagship university didn't continue to increase tuition. We've invested in early childcare so that parents can get back into the workforce. If you don't have a place to send your child that you think they're safe and well cared for, you're not going to go back. You know, those are, and if it's not affordable, you can't go back. Similarly, 24 million into mental health and 50 million into our nonprofit sector, which I will tell you is not what they need, but it is better than nothing. Just to put it in perspective, I believe the ask is 300 million. So they got 500, and next year we'll be back, and it will be difficult because we'll have $400 million of ARPA to fill. Then we won't have ARPA dollars to do that. So next year will be a really hard fought fight, because you heard us all talk about priorities we weren't able to fund this year. We will have those in addition to this hole. So, and I'm not saying we shouldn't have spent the ARPA dollars. It was spend it or lose it. So we might as well spend it. But next year will be another delicate dance. And I hope to have the privilege to continue to fight for our community and our state on the behalf of Fairfield. And so really just feeling overwhelming gratitude.
Into that. I use the word connection. And this job is often being a dot connector in chief, as a colleague from California shared with me. And I love that. I also say that this job is about all those structural issues we've talked about, but it's about people's individual lives. And for me, I have shared a number of times what my family has gone through the past, it feels like 10 years, but it's only been a few months since the beginning of the year. And I now serve as the public health co-chair for the state of Connecticut. What a tremendous privilege to know that the work that we do, while it may not make big headlines, right? Telehealth is not a headline issue. It absolutely impacts our lives. And while the Parkinson's registry that I talked about may not make a headline, Brigida Stankaitis, who was one of the main advocates for the bill, she has talked about the fact that she knows that, you know, there's no cure for her, but that maybe her work and the work she did to help us pass this bill will help someone else in the future. And to me, that's what it's all about. That's what this is for. There's no point otherwise. So that privilege is given to us by all of you. And it's our connection with you and with others in the community that make this work possible. And it's very profound. And I just, you know, in my father's honor and memory, he, you know, fought for our country and for the freedom to have the kind of debates I really wish we didn't have sometimes on the floor, but that we get to have. And I value it so much and thank you so very much. And to the league, the very first place that I came when I moved to this community, I will be forever grateful because, as my husband always says, he blames the league for me.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristen. I think you talk about the disappointment of the bills that didn't get done and how difficult it is through the myriad of personalities and process. I think we can really be very proud of what we did with House Bill 5507 for us to give the community a voice in regards to the UI monopole situation. That was an incredible accomplishment that I think everybody worked very hard together in a bipartisan basis on. Another critical issue is in regards to how potentially redistricting our schools, impacting our children and family was always a constant threat. And through the efforts in a bipartisan basis, talking to the governor's office, talking to the commissioner of education, she brought on and supported the idea of reevaluating the racial imbalance discussion. That is a huge win. I think the other broader basis in regards to elder care for our aging community, that is very, very important. I think the fiscal guardrail as a whole is an opportunity for us to pay respects to taxpayers and how we spend their money in regards to budgeting priority, which was a big question. These were all very important accomplishments that we can all hang our hat on. I think it's really about being a voice for the people of Fairfield that we've been so honored and privileged to do. And experience and connections matter because what we had to go through in the final days, believe me, was just, you can't describe it. But that comes from the experience and the relationships and the connections that comes through. And I think for myself in my 15th year, representing this community and knowing who the players are, the leadership, the governor's office, and also for Representative McCarthy-Vahey, who has been in service for 10 years and a chairmanship role, we are in a connected basis. And it's about experience making a difference to do things on behalf of our community. And also with a context for the broader state as well. We bear that responsibility as state legislators. But for me, my heart is always making sure that the people in the 28th district, and particularly from my hometown of Fairfield, that we are doing the best that we can and giving them a voice up in Hartford. So really is a privilege to do what we do. And again, as I began this meeting by saying Happy Mother's Day, we could never be able to do all that we do without the support of our family and spouses. So today I'm going to do a little bit of a shout out. Greenfield Hill Congregational Church, the Dogwood Festival is happening this weekend. Great crafts, Mother's Day presents, but the dogwoods are blooming and they're beautiful. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And thank you for coming and thank you for being here.
Benny, so he like wants to go to the Dogwood Festival. He's like, oh my God, I got it.
I'm like, oh, okay.
I'm looking around. Everybody else is like.
I stopped in to see